In the first portion of this interview, Megan Dunn, a college biology teacher, described a bottleneck to learning in one of her courses. In the process, they defined this as the central challenge for students. Now their task is to make explicit what students must be able to do to get past this bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just focus on the visual concept, if I'm always like, if they're the struggle is the visualization in their head, maybe they know the definition, they just have a problem visualizing it. So what do they have to do in order to take the definition and make a visual representation in their head instead of just seeing the picture on the paper?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
So like, what
yeah.
do you do when you create those visuals in your head? What do you do in your, what do you do?
So when I kind of look at, like, if I'm going in a different field of biology or reading something and trying to figure out what's going on, in every definition, so I sort of do a more conscious check than maybe they're doing. So as I look through that definition, if I read like goes up by concentration gradient, I would say, do I know what that means? And I would stop at that part of the phrase and say, okay, concentration gradient, what are we moving? Okay, we're talking about, are we moving like big things? Are we moving little things? Are we could it be anything? How specific are we moving things? And then, okay, I've identified that something needs to move and it's up its concentration gradient. So that to me means I have little, and then I'm going to move it across. So I'm have to move it against something. So this means these mechanisms all have to be going through a membrane. And I'm pushing it into something harder. And then to me, as being a more experienced one, I'm like, oh, if I have to push something, that doesn't seem like something that would happen naturally in biology. That doesn't seem like something that would just occur. I bet it needs energy. And then you would read more on the definition and some of the depending on what glossary you would look at, it would say, which requires an input of energy. And then to me, again, being more, that's a key in biology, energy. Okay, that means I'm probably going to put ATP. And so there has to be something that's going to like fuel that to move. Right. And then in that definition, that also, even though they didn't tell me that, that also implies that this molecule can't move just by itself. It has to move with a protein. So even if that definition, it wasn't part of the thing, in order for like me to see this to get across the membrane and push, I'm seeing there has to be something there present in the membrane that's going to help take that energy and then help move it across that membrane.
So when you go to the basic, right? When they start, is there a way where all that information that maybe it's, you know, it's more obvious to someone more experienced, but not to them? Is there a way for them? Well, you cannot do, I imagine, this with every word that appears, right?
Yeah.
Because if not, it's it will be difficult. But kind of something important like that, is there a way to work around, you know, not just the definition, but well, kind of go what is needed for this with, you know, the basics? Do they have that before, just to
so again, some might pick up more on pattern recognition, so maybe it's not explicit to them, but again, it's sort of in the field, if I'm going to go and say, okay, we're going to learn about 4 transport mechanisms, or this chapter is telling me there's 4 different transport mechanisms, I'm going to start writing pros and cons, or like start trying to, in my head, figure out ways they're similar and ways that they're different. So what's a rule for, and then by kind of doing that or making like, okay, first, like if I would read a new chapter and okay, I'm going to learn about all these new transport mechanisms. Let me write sort of the information that they're telling me. Okay, and then I'm going to look across the 4 and start seeing if I can draw parallels with the other ones. Are there similarities? Are there differences? So if I'm starting to see something across all 4, to me, that starts to question, okay, does that mean that all transport mechanisms work this way? And then I kind of know in biology, like there's never an all, there's always an exception to something, right? But I'm like, but most might, this might be a good rule that's holding true for just transport. And then if there's some, okay, are there some that have like 2 that have certain things? Are they more similar? And I start to kind of rank them against one another. And that starts to draw out like, okay, that helps me decide in a new situation. Okay, I'm given this new problem, this story problem of figuring out what mechanism I have. What pieces in that chart do I have that will help me make this prediction?
Mhm.
So why do you think, I mean, what would be inhibiting students from actually doing that? Because what you just explained is a very complex topic and a complex way of analyzing text and being able to pull out information and apply prior information into that. So if looking at students, you know, are they struggling with the pulling out of the information or the application of the information?
There's probably a degree of both, but yeah, I think there's lots of levels in this to get to that prediction that they could go wrong. So at the first level, I think there's a portion of my students that are just having a hard time figuring out how much information they need. And again, there's a lot of stuff. And so if they're not explicitly asked to draw that chart, that might not be obvious to them of like, when I'm reading and learning biology, again, for most of the things that you're looking at, you're trying to pull out what's the most important thing here. And sometimes the important things are like looking at a very specific piece of the chemical structure. And then sometimes it's like big stuff. And so they don't know, like, why do I care about this phosphate at this position? Like, that seems really, really, really picky. But then you're like, oh, if I want to add, like, I'm going through DNA synthesis and want to add something there, you really need to know about your phosphates and hydroxyls and where they are on that molecule to get it to snap together. But then there's other pieces of the structure that we don't know. And so I think it can be really overwhelming for a novice to figure out, when do I care and when can I let it go?
Yeah, that's hard for a student to get. I mean, you're asking a young adult to be able to, like, are they okay with the definitions? Like, are they, like, when they're regurgitating the definition, are they okay doing that?
I think as long as it doesn't change very much.
Okay.
So if I keep it pretty close to the textbook definition, yes, I think most of them that are trying and really like studying, at least at that level can, the basic levels are able to bring it back to me. Now, that's not everyone. And again, in this worksheet, you could see that there was a problem with, they didn't understand that carrier proteins could work for these 2 different ones, that it could work in this other mechanism too. And so they thought that was a reason that you would go with this thing. And that didn't impact this question, but could impact another question if they thought that that was truly something that went with this, was very unique to this mechanism that could be something that was a problem later. So they do have slight problems. It's usually with things that are, they'll get the first part of the definition right. It's the little the more subtle details that are a little harder.
For someone that is not in biology, so what you were explaining seems like very complex, and that you need to have a lot of previous understanding. And I don't know exactly what students go through before they get to you at this level.
Yeah.
So, but as we were talking, so what would be the basic steps, or are they covered, before they get to this stage?
Yeah, so this is about halfway through the semester. So they've had some chemistry, they've had some movement stuff.
Okay.
We're starting to, so it's a biological mechanisms class. And so this is the beginning of starting to learn a set of mechanisms. We've kind of gone through our first unit of here's what a protein is, here's what a membrane is, here's what a cell is, here's digestion, and then let's look at more of the details. So this is our first kind of look at more okay, let's start looking at how we start moving these things. And so it is a more complicated thing, but I think if we kind of focus more on how can we help them have a better understanding at the beginning, or how to learn new words or concepts, that might be helpful. Because if they're going, so I feel like a lot of the strategy is I want to match, these two bold words together. And if I can do that, I'll be okay. And our goal is, again, the end goal is, okay, you can start using and applying these basic things that you're learning. But it's really, really hard to know what the definition, what's important. And so we have this conversation a lot in the office hours of, okay, but how do I know, or what's important? Or unfortunately, it's a lot of right before the day before the exam or whatever, of what's the most important piece. And so we want to know what's the bullet point? Can you summarize this in 15 minutes or something like that? And so there is a degree of some of this just needs time. And I think a different approach on how you learn and study the words, so that you're always looking at everything that we're building. So our first chapter we talk about is water and ions and pH. And so that would be important for this chapter to kind of understand the chemistry. So if you don't understand the chemistry, it's hard to build on any of that afterward. But if you only understand, if you've only memorized stomach is acidic, but you don't think about what makes it acidic, and your definition of acidic is a lot of protons, but you don't connect that stomach has a lot of protons, then this example that I showed you was really hard to do. So you fall on that end. So there's a lot of steps where, again, they can fall, but again, a lot of it is making the connection. If you can connect that, truly understand that pH is based on your proton concentration, then it's not as hard a leap. And that's something that you learned in the beginning, but you maybe memorized it as, it's this proton concentration that's greater than X value or whatever. And so it totally depends on, are you going for the minimum definition, or are you trying to see how it may work? And again, some of it is, I think the students that practice it more, I think the more that you work with it, the more you try to draw connections, the more you try to really think about how they work, then it's an easier transition to make. But if you kind of approach all your assignments as okay, let me look up, like, let me get the bare minimum, then it's a very hard task to do. But I think there's plenty that are spending a lot of time. Like, I think there's plenty that are legitimately sitting there and writing a definition, like word definition, and spending a lot of time doing that. And so they're putting a lot of effort, but I'm not sure they're always using their time the best way. Like, if you were actually like, draw that picture. I know it's scary to draw that picture, but if you tried to put that definition of your transport in a drawing, maybe that would stick more with you. Or if you went out and actually made that table to compare, maybe that would stick in your mind more. Or if you tried to, as you're learning this definition, figure out how might it connect, or kind of concept map, or have these different tools to be able to figure out, how does this definition relate to other things? And when I'm learning my definition, can I double check my definition to see if it checks with something else that I learned in class? So if I'm reading something that, a promoter is a DNA sequence. Okay, what was DNA sequence? Do I remember what a DNA sequence was? We talked about that. Am I good on that? Or do I have a good picture of like, what macromolecule am I looking at when I say that? And so instead of just memorizing, the DNA sequence that initiates transcription, I think, okay, DNA sequence, DNA, do I know DNA? What picture am I seeing in my head on DNA? And so I think a lot of biology, or biologists naturally, I think, visualize sort of these definitions as they go. That might not be an obvious thing for a novice student, of like, oh, I was supposed to check what DNA means. Because in my picture, like maybe their picture, they're thinking about protein or anything, or it doesn't really matter. And, DNA tells me something like, oh, I got it. That makes sense. Like, I've got this clear image of like what I'm looking at. And so, and they might just be like, DNA sequence, make sure I include that. And, or they just not even pay attention to DNA sequence and just think sequence as some sort of letter. And so if I change that definition and swap out DNA for RNA, they might pick that option and say, oh, but it's like, oh, to a biologist, a piece of DNA and a piece of RNA are like totally different things. But to a freshman, no. Like, okay, it's a weird molecule. I got sequence right. How specific do I need to be? And so, and again, but I think back to, week 2, we talked about all the difference between DNA and RNA. And then again, in week 5, we brought up this difference in it. And now we're here in week 10, like I'm still building on that. And so the most successful students in my class are able to kind of build on their knowledge, whereas I think the ones that kind of take it, cram, and get rid of it start to really struggle towards the end, because you need that first part, and you need to start making those connections. And the definitions get harder and harder, because within your definition are all these scary words that you defined earlier on in the semester.
I think that you mentioned a lot of important words, and the one that stuck out for me was connection. I think they are focusing on those connections. And as you said, and we can compare this to what we were talking about languages, is they think that plugging in words, not seeing the whole picture, it's they think that works, and it does not all the time. There has to be some understanding of how things function. So I think connections is a big word, in what you're talking about that evidently they are not being able to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that is what I think it's a big one, and I can, see that in languages too. As it's connection. It may not be the word connection exactly, but it's kind of the functioning that they get it. It's like it's not just replacing words that makes you understand a definition or.
Yeah, exactly. It's being able to kind of see how it fits with everything else, which is hard. It's hard to kind of describe how you do it, and it's definitely something they struggle with, and it's a little hard to kind of teach, because it's like, especially as a person that's, I think the more interest that you have in it, and the more like, that's cool, I want to see how that works, or as someone who can see that, oh, I have these basic tools and now I can use them, that kind of drives me to be like, oh, now that I know the rules of transport, I can go off and predict all my other stuff that I'm going to do. Or, oh, now I know how like replication works, I can now start looking at how like predict what would happen if this went wrong or something like that. And it's really hard, and it's hard because I think, especially because there's students that are, again, I don't know, some of they want to do well, they want to try,
know how,
but yeah, they don't. And it's a thing where, and again, some of it's time. It's just, do you want to put the time into, and as you had talked about, you have the 3 hours in Spanish to be able to do it. And so you only have so much time in the classroom. And some of these application things need time working with the basic concepts. But this idea of, what do I study? What do I know? What do I like? What's important? How do I know what's important?
And that's
the answer to how I know it's important is it going to impact whether I need to do something with it? And then, so you need to know how to apply, but that's like a chicken egg situation. Like, oh, how do I know that this 3' hydroxyl in DNA is important? Well, you can't add a base without it. That's where you're going to add a base. And if you try to snap it on anywhere else, it's not going to work. And that's why we were in this situation, or wherever we were talking about DNA at that time, we really care about that 3' hydroxyl. There might be other times when we're talking about DNA that doesn't matter. Maybe we just care that it's double-stranded. And maybe there's some other time we care that it's negative. And so though each situation might call us to play on a different piece. And so it's really hard. Yeah, I run into this chicken or egg situation where it's like, how do you know? Well, are you going to need it? How do you know you need it? If you don't know what it is, I don't know. And that's where, again, I think when I think about, as I approach like learning a new concept in biology, like I write a lot, I draw a lot, like I make a lot of trying to, how does this word connect to that? I do a lot of like stopping at each piece of the definition to make sure that I know what that means. Because again, you can go on the treasure hunt of this word, go look up that word, then go look up that word. If again, you don't remember it from a month ago, then yeah, you're going to start doing this treasure hunt of glossary to figure out what that definition is. And hopefully the more treasure hunt you do, you start to realize like, oh, I need to hold on to this, or I need to like, maybe this is important, or the jumping a bunch starts holding it in. But again, I work with the material. I write, I draw, I compare, contrast. I try to figure out some connections, try to figure out, where is this different? Why would this might be a problem? And so I think I'm a lot more active with trying to learn my definition than a newbie or a novice or an 18-year-old would be at trying to do that. And so I don't know if, again, how much time you put in, but if going in and trying to model that, like, okay, how do you learn this word? How do you do that? But it's a lot of work. If you want to really learn and draw these connections and try to really hold on and move beyond that, memorize keyword definition, plug in here and there, you need to practice it. You need to actually work with it. You need to have a kind of self-check mechanism, which again is hard because you don't know what you're self-checking against when you're new and you're 18, going through this process. So I think it's a big jump into biology, into kind of college level sciences, to be able to make, okay, I really have to know this definition. Like my sort of superficial definition or me just matching things isn't going to get me very far. I need to be able to draw connections. Did this word ever come up earlier in the semester? Does it apply to what came up in the semester? So double check that. Do I know, can I kind of visually see in this definition how this might work? Because again, my class is biological mechanisms. So a lot of stuff's moving, interacting, doing things to one another. And so in a lot of our definitions, they should be able to start seeing sort of a picture in their mind of what this looks like, how it might interact in that cell. And so some of the expectations, I think, are off too on what they really need to be doing or approaching. And again, in a new discipline, like, oh, I didn't know that this is way off from what I should be doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So a main thing, I think, is that what we talked about is the habit thing, breaking habits, right? Because they need, so kind of when they approach your class, it's like maybe the habits they were having, the methods of studying do not work in this particular case. And so kind of how could you get students to kind of understand, what would you be able, how could you do it, kind of able to understand from day one, how to
model, to go in and sort of make it like, okay, first week, first chapter, a bunch of new terms
together.
How do you go about reviewing? How do you draw these pictures? We talk about water molecules. Draw that picture.
Mm-hmm.
Think about when you're drawing that picture, think about, oh, I'm putting my positive here. I'm putting my negative here.
Why would you do that?
Connect those. I'm going to really thoughtful process and kind of go through, like, when I look at the water molecule and I want to learn about it, what am I going to put down in my notes, in my review, in my summary of sort of what's important for this molecule, and start modeling sort of, that I visualize, that I try to think about connections, that I try to think about
whole information.
If it has a positive and negative and we're just doing water molecules together, I wonder, does it just have to be water molecules? I ask myself in that picture. Or could it be maybe more? Could it attach to other things? And sort of more vocalize early on in the beginning, these are sort of the things you should be thinking about every time you're looking at this new thing, every time you're looking at that. And it's okay to ask those questions too. Hey, it's just water molecules. Can it connect to anything. And again, that's hard in 300, but maybe if being more explicit about I'm drawing things, I'm not just reading, highlighting. I'm very active with my pencil whenever I'm taking notes. When I'm reading and studying for this test, I'm trying to really be very thoughtful of and very intentional about, in my definition, do I know what every word means? When I read that definition, do I have a picture in my mind of how that might work or how it might interact with something, even if maybe it's an alien thing that doesn't really exist, but do I see how it can maybe play out, how it might work, how it connects to other words within the chapter, how it connects to other concepts in the chapter, before I go on to the next one.
Through this whole discussion, there's been very detailed things, kind of
Yeah.
like, taking the word and making your own definition.
Yeah.
If I can't internalize the information and be able to give that back, then that's something that can be focused on, or just the ability of taking notes and working with the concept. I mean, there's a lot of details that have come up from this discussion that you could just zero in on.
Yeah.
Even though it's like this huge
Take one of those steps.
One of those little steps that's just like the biggest pitfall for a student. And maybe that one step would help them in molecular biology.
Yeah.
Because, if I, do this here, I'm successful and I have practice, then when I go to molecular, I can apply it there also. So you're learning that transition of making connections, just maybe it's through notes or the vocab, making it more you instead of the book.
Additional presentations are available on YouTube, the Decoding website, and the Transitions to College Project website.